Okay, moving on from Locke and Newton, let's look at what this looks like in a diagram. So because of these global network flows in and out and in and out, the cancer, this tumor that we saw growing in the traditional hierarchy, is now threatening to swamp it entirely. It's squeezing up the old elites. It's replacing this new burgeoning class of new urban elites. It's got this whole new body of rich, free peasants that aren't these poor serfs anymore. And it's also sending these network flow tendrils down further and further into rural society. So this is a very disturbed traditional agrarian pyramid, and you can see if this part grows and grows and grows, something might explode. It's like, it's like having a huge zit of rich, wealthy, middle class that is not containable by the old hierarchy, which had nobility on the top and the peasants on the bottom. Okay, so one of the things this chapter does is look very particularly at the oddity of Britain. So I just want you to think for a moment about what Britain looks like on the map. Now, normally, if you turn your head sideways, you'll see this is the just a standard Eurasian map, and this is sort of huge China here and Russia, and I'm pushing the slides on, which I don't mean to. And very normally in a map of the world, you'll see Britain kind of sat in the middle, like, we choose how we display our maps. Oops, this way, this orientation, and the general map of the world, which has Britain sort of sat very comfortably in the centre, is not an accident, because this comes out of British Empire. Okay, but when we turn it sideways and think about it as a land mass, it's on a globe. This is a land mass. Britain down here at the bottom. You're not going to expect that place to really kind of be the power here, to be taking off. And so we need to think about how odd it is that Britain does take off. It gets such a big empire. It is the leader in the Industrial Revolution. Because unlike the Agrarian Revolution, which had many different points of origin, the Industrial Revolution has one point of origin, Britain, and one time of origin, and that's the 18th century. And we call this a contingent event, a happy accident, if you will, that no one had an overarching plan to, I think we should have an industrial revolution. It just happens in one place and one time. We need to understand more about England and its global context to understand what's going on. Well, in the first place, we're going to go through, and you'll see in the chapter what's unique about state and society, culture and identity, and political transformations in Europe in this period. And again, odd isn't necessarily better. It just is different in this period, and this helps explain Britain's, trajectory. So let's look at this is the British Empire in 1763. This is one thing that Britain has, this big 13 colonies in Canada and the Bahamas, the Antilles, obviously Britain, tiny parts of Africa. This is one thing I said last class. Don't slide together the colonizing in this period and colonizing in the 19th century. That's annoying. It doesn't start in this period. There's only tiny things, but certainly significant parts of India, and this increases quite quickly, and India does bring a lot of wealth to Britain. Okay, so what is different? Well, it's a constitutional monarchy. Constitutional monarchy way back. This is a picture of Elizabeth I presiding over Parliament, and it's a combination of monarch and Parliament. And this just grows, as we said, after William of Orange, he works very closely on both sides of the house, as we'd say now, but with both political divides. And he's followed by a couple of much less capable monarchs. And these monarchs kind of just give over the running of the country almost completely to the cabinet, this political council called the cabinet. There is lots of political infighting in Britain, and this is also very healthy in some ways for the parliamentary system, because it means that you can be in opposition to the government without that being a treasonous act. That you can be a member of the loyal opposition. So this means that, you know, you can have division and debate without it being, you know, saying the government is wrong. Now, you know, this is obviously carried to extremes today. There's some people in America who would disagree with anything the government did, and would see it as treasonous if anybody around them supported anything that the government did. So, you know, it is a little bit of a two-edged sword. And remember, this is not a perfect democracy. This is voting is limited to wealthy men. There are rotten boroughs. There's, you know, some corruption there. But Britain's government does aim at cooperation rather than coercion. And one of the key elements of this is that the rich pay taxes. And that might sound a little odd, but in France, the rich tended not to pay taxes. The tax burden fell on the poorest, and this was to turn out to be a great weakening of the state. But in Britain, the rich ran the state, so they agreed to pay the taxes that provided for the running of the state. So when they collect these taxes together, these rich people, they want it managed professionally. So one of the things that they do is inaugurate the Bank of England in 1694, which is a private company, but it's the state's banker. It provides loans to the states pay interest, and basically that interest is then shares in the company, the Bank of England. The Bank of England has the right to issue banknotes, and so we get a currency of the state that's paper money rather than depending on the amount of gold and silver in coinage. We can actually do away with all that troublesome gold and silver. If a state needs more money, and usually the reason that a state needs more money is for war, then it can actually have a system to borrow it. But because this borrowing isn't necessarily always in the best interest of the country, war can actually be limited. But it does make the state kind of bankruptcy proof, and this is what is good about the system. So overall, in terms of Britain, the extent of its professional state mechanisms, these are not just run by, you know, Percy de Blois because Percy de Blois' father used to do it and his father's father before him. These are professional mechanisms of state, and these magnify Britain's capabilities to a great extent and allow Britain to take its place on the global stage. Okay. So we talked also about this emerging consumer society, and in Britain in particular, you can see this shift. This shift in wealth is really quite tremendous. This is quite supposed to be quite a humorous painting from William Hogarth's series of The Rake's Progress. And this Tom Rakewell, he's spending his money attracting musicians, artists, and purveyors of commodified culture. He is newly rich, and he wants to show it by all these globalized aspects. Okay, so we're going to look now at how England changes between the beginning of the 17th century and the middle of the 18th century. So we can see we have this blob, this cancer has grown. The rural is still there, but we're getting urban wage labourers, merchant urban merchants mixing with the gentry, the lower nobility. We have this blob off the side of joint stock companies, which are partially paid for by the state and partially by the urban merchants who buy into the joint stock companies. At the very top, there's still the king, there's still church barons and secular barons, but these are slowly sliding into each other. And then by 1780, we get a very, very different view of England. The triangle is gone. What it's replaced with is a sphere. And in this sphere, society is now a sphere. And what's happened is the dynamic is now social economic. That's how we would frame this society as social economic, rather than social political. The political aspects in very much have been taken outside of society itself. So the power structure doesn't necessarily embed itself in society in the same way. There's more mobility in a sphere than there was in the old triangle. And so sort of removed from the mass of society is the ruling organs of that society. So, and they actually do look at it like organs, don't they, plugged into this. So this is your parliament, cabinet, the military bureaucracy. Allied to that and attached to it very much is the Bank of England. Allied and attached to that are the joint stock companies, and these are again plugged into the global network, which feeds back into this new capitalist elite / aristocracy. So the old landed nobility, titled nobility, and now this new rich, wealthy capitalist elite, the middle class of professionals and shopkeepers, and the working class. Okay. And you'll see even the king is removed once more, but between the ruling sort of blue triangle that's left here outside of society, the king is removed from the parliament by the prime minister. Now, if we flipped this sphere on its side, we'd see the back of the sphere, and we'd be able to see how gender is constructed. This boundary is a little fuzzy. This is the front part that we're looking at here, and this is the female part that we're looking at here. And you can see that female labor does exist, but it remains, hidden behind male labor, and that it is actually perhaps more restricted in this new society than it was in the previous late agrarian society. Okay, the chapter then moves on, this is the Bank of England. The chapter then moves on to talk about various political revolutions that really are, as Marilla calls them, English infections. And this is very often not the way that you'll think about the American Revolution, but beginning in England's own colonies in North America in 1776, as we said, there's North American revolutions. In absolutist France in 1789, which then has this horrible roller coaster of a period where they try on different types of politics. They have their revolution. The revolution becomes very radical, leading to a whole bunch of people being put to death by the guillotine. And in the end, they end up with another absolutist ruler, Napoleon, who is a general who takes over and then calls himself emperor. And he's seen here crowning his wife as empress. So much for equality, fraternity, equality and brotherhood. The knock-on effect of the French Revolution was to create another absolutist ruler. But this does have a big effect on some of the French colonies, and in particular Haiti, the French colony of Saint-Dominique at the time, where they have a revolution very much caused by this instability in France. Okay, so some of these are some of the screen images of revolution, and I'll let you look at those in the book in more detail. So let's move on to the final thought here, and it's issues in doing world history. Before we get too carried away with the idea of a revolution, we need to be very clear that it's always been a very limited. The effects are very limited. Very often, the poorest and the weakest members of society, poor women, children, don't get substantially more rights amongst these things. In Haiti, what you get is a situation where there's small landowners sat on top of subsistent peasant farmers. At least they're not slaves anymore, but they're still subsistence farmers. In France, you do see a more professionalization of the state and some social mobility, but the position of women weakens. In Britain and America, you can sometimes say that that the revolution didn't cause social change, but rather the revolution allowed Britain and America to catch up with social change that had already happened. But the votes were still very limited. And overall, low production, slow communication still prevailed for now. Next chapter, different story. And so the issues in doing world history, as the Beatles sang. So you say you want a revolution, but what is a revolution? And this, word, particularly, today, I think I saw an advertisement for the Nike Revolution or something like that, which is very funny to me because there was a rebellion in 6th century Byzantium that was called the Nike Rebellion, but they were talking about trainers. Okay, so trainers are not a revolution, okay? And so we have to think about clearly how revolution differs from evolution. What is just a natural progression of things, and does a revolution have to happen very, very quickly? Is it just related to politics? Does a revolution have to bring about lasting change? If we say that, well, the French Revolution, in 10 years' time, they have another absolutist ruler. Is that really a revolution? Well, of course, we can't get rid of the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Glorious Revolution. They would sound really odd without this word revolution. So semantically, we're going to carry on using that word revolution, but think about what it means and don't attach the idea that everything changes for the better. For a lot of people, it doesn't. So in this course, there are we talk about 3 major revolutions, 2 of which will happen kind of before this part of the course starts. So the cognitive linguistic revolution that we talked about in the introduction, where people start to think and speak differently. The agrarian revolution, where people start to grow plants and farm animals, and the industrial revolution. And it's the industrial revolution we're going to talk about next week.